Hello and welcome to another segment of Contagious Courage with VN King. As you know, courage takes on many different forms. And being vulnerable and sharing your story is another part of being courageous. Well, my next guest, her story is laced with courage. Everything from her birth story right into the challenges that she's faced as an adult. Welcome, my friend Tammy Richards.
Thank you
for being here. Mother of three, professional businesswoman in the healthcare industry, and co-author in a book called Dreaming Big and Being Bold.
Yeah.
I actually want to start with this book, Tammy. And the chapter that you've written is called The Gift of Disruption. And you explain your birth story. Can you explain that to me and the readers and why that story has shaped who you are today?
Yeah. So I have a very interesting birth story. My mom got pregnant for me when she was 17 and, was in a very poor situation, came from a poor family, and of course being 17, certainly not what she had expected for her future. But then there was a couple that lived about an hour or so away who were praying for a baby. And they had one child, but then couldn't have more children after that. And so someone had connected them with my mom, and they went to meet her and kind of talked about the situation and had offered, kind of asked her, I guess, if they could adopt me. And so it's very interesting because my mom didn't want to give me up. But they kind of remained in contact with each other over the next few months, and they would take me for a little while at a time. And after a few months, they decided that the only way to kind of keep us in their lives was for myself and my mom to go and live with them. And so that's what they did. They took us both in.
Wow, what an incredible story. Your mom, when I think about it and I hear that story, I think about the story of Moses, right? I've heard you reference your story, and I think it's such a beautiful, amazing story that someone took you and your mom in. How did that shape who you are today? That your beginning, such a gift of disruption. Why did you consider it a gift?
Yeah, so I mean, the thing is that it certainly wasn't, as I said, what my mom was looking for her future. The inability to have children certainly wasn't what this couple had been looking for their future. But yet the two stories intertwined, and God made it so that what they were lacking, she had, what she was lacking, they had. And for both of them, both sides, it did become a gift.
Yes.
And so the very, I guess, part about it that I'm so thankful for is that through them, we were introduced to the gospel, and we kind of, I guess that's probably where I received my foundation in Christianity and my faith.
I love that. I'm going to read one of the quotes, actually, in your chapter. At the beginning, it says, "Life is not about having it all together all the time. Rather, it's about having the ability to put it back together once it's fallen apart." Tammy, there's a lot in here that is said without being said. Could you explain to me some of those moments in your life when you've had to pull yourself back together?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess like anyone, they kind of wish that after having such a beautiful start to life, like I did, that it would kind of flow and we would have been able to say at that point, and they all lived happily ever after. But that was not the case. And so for me, after the birth of my second child, just 24 hours after, I guess, I experienced an anxiety attack that then led me into a very deep, dark postpartum depression. And so that was certainly a difficult challenge. And then a few years later, divorce. And so I've certainly had to deal with some disruptions of my own over the years.
Yes, and having to pull yourself back together in those times. Bring me back to some of there's people that are watching that, like, you've suffered through the postpartum depression, and that led you down a dark road and all the things, and then you're trying to maintain your faith, and you've always been a person, as I've heard you say, that, I've always wanted to love the Lord and do the right thing, and so now you're struggling with depression, and now you're divorced. Like, share some of those darkest times, maybe a one moment, like a defining moment for you when you maybe reached a point of desperation, but how you managed to come back out of that.
So I guess, like, to start with, I would start with the depression, because that came first. Something that I never thought I would have to deal with personally, because I was a strong woman, career oriented, felt like I really had my life together. And to be honest, even though I was a nurse, I kind of thought that people that went through depression were people who couldn't get through the issues that they were dealing with. And then 24 hours after my son was born, I had an anxiety attack that night in the hospital room, and I didn't even really know what was happening to me initially. I began to physically shake, began to have these thoughts of fear and uncertainty, and that led me to spiral down into a very dark place. I felt like there was a cloud of darkness over me, and that stayed for a long time. I went through emotions that I never ever even knew existed, really. I went physically, the manifestations of the depression, pain in my chest, as I said, physically shaking. I was afraid to be in public settings. I was afraid to be alone. I was afraid to be with my children. And I really felt as though there was no way out of the darkness that I was feeling. A lot of people will say, well, you just need to fight those things. And I had heard that so many times. And so I was trying to fight, but I felt like I was fighting this monster that was so much bigger than me, and coming up certainly on the losing end for a long time.
Tammy, thank you for sharing these times when it wasn't so great. And I really want to allow the listeners to get a glimpse of really how bad it was for you, because it wasn't just like, something to get over and it's depressed and you just move on. Share a little bit about like just how bad it got, and really how did you pull yourself out? Well, so it was over a period of months after the baby was born that I struggled, and it reached a really dark place for me. I would spend nights awake, shaking, thoughts racing in my head, kind of feeling as though someone was sitting on my chest. And I went to see my doctor for quite a few times, actually, and tried to convince her of all different things that I thought was wrong with me, in denial, I guess, to some degree of what it really was. But early on, she had wanted me to start some medication, and I was refusing, because I felt that as a good Christian woman, I needed to trust the Lord and that He would bring me through. And so I did trust the Lord, but that takes on different forms. And so I was trusting in God to bring me through, and He did. And I learned a lot in those days about leaning on Him and finding strength in His Word, and certainly letting the Lord be your strength. But it actually reached a point where I thought of ending my life. And I actually thought, like, my children would be better off without me. I'm just a burden to everyone anyhow. All those lies that I was starting to convince myself were the truth. And even reached a day where I was at my parents' house and went for a walk one day, I remember so vividly, and stood on the banks kind of in Newfoundland and overlooking the water, and thought,
maybe it'd be better if I just jumped and it would all be over. But in those moments, I believe that the Lord was with me, and he reminded me of all the things that I did have to live for still, and that I was able to get through and overcome, and that my story wasn't finished at that point. And I walked away from that day, and I wish I could say that it was all over then, and that's the point where I reached my miraculous healing. But no, but I do think that was a turning point.
Yeah.
If nothing else, a point where I realized just how sick I was. Yeah. And so in that time, actually it's funny because that was a Good Friday. And on that day, I went home that evening and I went to the Good Friday service with my parents. And I don't remember exactly what the pastor spoke that day, but I just remember him talking about how Jesus had conquered death, and that because of it we can have abundant life. And I just remember those words being exactly what I needed in my moment of desperation. And so a lot of things kind of transpired after that, but eventually I did end up going and seeing my doctor and finally admitting that I needed help. And so I started an antidepressant with I guess the acknowledgement of the fact that I was clinically ill, and if I had some other sort of physical illness, I probably wouldn't have even waited as long. And so based on that, I'm a strong believer that yes, sometimes God chooses to heal people instantly. Other times their journey is different. And I was finally okay with that, and okay with admitting that for me, I needed to lean on the miracle of medication to get me through. And it started turning around then.
I think that you said something very key a little bit ago, and it was that you had to choose, or you then you heard something, God spoke into your life, and then you did something. I believe that's very key, because somebody that's watching might actually have missed that, because it's like, well, if I'm struggling so bad now, and I can't pull myself out, but you still do have a choice, right? You can ignore going to seek for help. Absolutely. Or you can ignore those, those people around you that are trying to encourage you to move forward. But at the end of the day, when it's just you and God, or just you and the choice to move forward, you could still have been back there, right?
Absolutely. Honestly, in those moments, as dark as it was, I think we have this innate sense within us that we're made for survival, and we're made for relationship with the Lord. And so, when we're down in the valley, even David said, "What though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," those are the times when we can make that decision to trust in the Lord and say, God, I don't see where you're bringing me through, or why I'm walking through this. And he then is able to show us through I had people call me sometimes that just spoke a word into my life. I spent a lot of time in the Word, looking for sources of strength. I listened to a lot of music. And I remember listening to music. There was one song in particular that said, God prepared me for such a time as this. And, I can kneel with a brother who's bearing a burden and say, I know, because I've been there too. And I just kept believing that there's purpose in this, Lord. And so, it was really dark. He didn't bring me through it overnight, but I did have to make that decision. As much as I felt that I had no strength and I had no ability, God was able to bear me up and bring me through.
And look at where you are now. And as I say that, I actually, I remember that scripture in Songs of Solomon 8 and 5, I believe. It's like, look at her now. Who is this coming up from the desert, leaning on her beloved? And that's what I see when I hear your story, and that's what like we desire, like that God desires for us when we're going through the desert times and we cannot see that we are clinging. And I see that in your story, that you literally cling to God when you didn't have anything else, and that is the thing that I that screams loudly, and I love that. And I just want to bring back to this book for a second, because somebody's watching thinking, in a book, Dreaming Big, Being Bold, they must think, wow, you're so courageous, Tammy. You know, and you are. But I just wanted to say, like, and ask you, what does it mean for you to see your name inside this book, Dreaming Big and Being Bold? Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah.
After all that you've been through.
Well, so when my friend Paula approached me about being a part of this book initially, I thought, I really have nothing to tell, kind of, like, who am I, sort of. And then the Lord really challenged me with that and said, actually, no, I have given you a story, and so I felt that by not doing this, there was a couple of things. I would have been taking glory from him, and not kind of giving back to him the praise for what he did bring me through. And then also, I would be robbing the people who are watching, or who also have these types of stories, but are walking through of the hope of knowing that there is life on the other side of it, and that you can live abundantly, and that, you know, even when you're in those dark days, like I remember in my divorce, when I was walking through that, I remember thinking, well, this is it. Like, I can never be used of the Lord now. I felt as though that was it. That was the end of my story. But the Lord is always writing us a new story, and his mercies are new every morning. And so, you know, this is kind of, for me, the acknowledgement that God brought me through, and that I am able, and you are able, and we are all able to rise above any circumstance, and to put the pieces back together with God's help and move on.
Yes, and that's actually a little bit of how we were going to end this today, is just to say, you know, if somebody's watching today and they've entered into some of the emotion or some of the things that you've been going through or have been through, what would be something that you would say, listen, I have one thing to say to you, this is what it would be? Or just if there's somebody watching and looking for that hope, looking for that one thing to turn something around, is there something that you would like to leave us with today, Tammy?
So when I started seeing a counselor after, or during, I guess, my divorce, and I'm a strong believer in seeking wise counsel. And I remember the counselor saying to me on one day when I was having a really dark day and kind of, again, feeling like there was no hope. And I remember him saying to me, Tammy, your name, so my name is Tammy Joy.
Yes.
My middle name is Joy. And, you know, he said, you've associated yourself with Tammy all these years, but there is joy in you. Joy is your name. Joy will become even more a part of your identity. And he said, you need to cling to Psalm 30 and verse 5, which says, weeping may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And what I would say to anyone going through those struggles, so first of all, don't be ashamed or afraid to reach out. God is not meant for us to walk this journey alone. Right. And so, and seek wise counsel, seek help from your physician if you need to, but seek the Lord, and he can do exceeding abundantly above all that we could ever ask or think. And so he'll turn it around, and joy really can come after all of those things that make you think that life is over. It's never over. If you're still breathing, it's not over.
That is so, so true. Wow, we could talk for hours, and sometimes we do, I know, but I just want to thank you so much for being here and being vulnerable, because that's another huge form of courage, and that is what we saw today. Just being vulnerable, to be able to share your scars and things of your past, to help others heal and to move forward. And courage is not the absence of fear, as we've heard many times. It's facing your fears and moving right on. Tammy, this is just the beginning for you. And I know you have a speaking engagement coming up here right away, but that's just the beginning as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing where God brings this into even more and more, like we just said, Ephesians 3:20, exceedingly abundantly above all we can ask or think. And so stay tuned. I'll have a link to Tammy's website where you can find a little bit more about her in my blog. And stay tuned for more with Tammy Richards in the future. And this is Vienne signing out with saying, "Not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to you in your name goes all the honor and glory for your unfailing love and faithfulness." Until next time, bye.